everybody, welcome to the next edition of UA Coffee Talk. The focus of our conversation today will be about how to think about user acquisition during times of crisis or generally under situations of sudden change. And certainly we're currently in that kind of a scenario with the coronavirus pandemic, but even more than that, what I really want to talk about today is, can we think about a framework or systematized way of thinking, how do we navigate, how do we optimize UA spend when the environment changes and we don't have a lot of data? And to talk about this today, we have our regular contributor, John Lau, and we have Mate Lansarek. Did I pronounce your last name correctly this time?
Perfect, man. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. So
thanks for having me.
Great. So, guys, let's start with the fundamental problem. So you start with an assumption about how players in your game will monetize based upon historical data. So you're assuming a certain payback window, you're assuming a certain ARPU curve, you're assuming a ROAS yield. But let's say like there's a recession or depression or things like coronavirus, or there's some new legal regulation, then how do we think about this changing environment and how do we actually change our spend? And just to make this more concrete, I wanted to provide some more specific examples of other potential environmental changes, just because we really don't want to just be talking about coronavirus, right? That's one example of how the environment changes. But for example, it could be things like the impact of real money gaming to social casino, to the regulation of gacha boxes or social casino in some states or countries, or even the introduction of a new game or game mode and the impact in terms of cannibalization of revenue to that game. And specific example there is the introduction of an auto chess mode to Hearthstone, but it could also be an external game that also cannibalizes your revenue as well. So therefore, just to be clear, when we say crisis, it can be a general environmental change. And so a lot of what we want to talk about today is around a general framework. How should we be thinking about this? And kind of what Ray Dalio would call a system or principles. So what do? Do we just wait for data? And so how should marketers be thinking about these kinds of situations? But just because we do have this kind of coronavirus situation right now, I thought we could start with that. So speaking specifically about the current situation, and then we can generalize, I thought I could start by asking you guys, what have you guys been seeing in terms of, impacts of coronavirus, and how have you guys been thinking about changing spend or, how you approach thinking about data and performance in this current time?
I'm more of a like conservative spender, and in these times, it's kind of difficult to predict anything because this is like very new situation. Yeah. So basically, what I was doing on the games that I manage was like trying to like lower the spend, and then try to look at the short-term ROAS instead of like aiming for 1 year, because the thing is we don't know what's gonna happen next month. We are seeing the situation in the US, obviously with the unemployment rate. So a lot of people just lose their jobs. So I think that this is gonna impact the spending behavior in the future. So that's why I actually like decrease the spend on several games, just looking at the short-term ROAS and then like saving up the money just to see like any data, because we're always trying to focus on data points and then based on the data make any decisions and then make any like predictions for the future. So basically that's I'm trying to wait for some data to kick in, and basically based on those at least like first initial payment behaviors on any data from the payment behavior, and then based on that like increase the spending.
So Mate, just to make an example a little bit more concrete, so when you were looking at short-term ROAS, like many kind of marketers out there, were you adjusting your budget based off of like a D3, D7 ROAS? And if you saw that lower, were you lowering spend, or were you just kind of proactively lowering the spend just to make sure that you're achieving those kind of short-term ROAS targets?
Yeah, so basically most of the games that manage are like focusing on day 90, for example, payback period, and then trying to like compare the early day 3, day 7 ROAS benchmarks as well. And when we saw that like a very huge difference, then we decreased the spend just, in case. And then actually like spending a couple of thousand per day just to make sure that we can recoup those money like day 60 or day 30 and then like, reinvest.
Well, right now I'm not doing any media buying, so whatever I say, it's more philosophical and academic. There's a couple ways I can kind of frame this. One way is to treat it like it's a brand new game launch, right? When you launch a new game, you don't have a ton of data, and you can treat the new cohorts that are coming in right now as if you were launching a new game. How would you approach a new game? Like, you don't have a lot of data, you don't have a lot of background. So one way is to think about in those terms. But to kind of broaden that, you also have to think about how this impacts like existing cohorts, right? Because existing cohorts, those users may not monetize the way that you think they will or how it is before. And a lot of the different UA marketers I've spoken with have talked about pulling back and spend. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, because as you look at the performance of the users and then you pull back and spend, inherently by pulling back and spend, you're also hindering your ability to grow. And so what is the long-term consequence of pulling back spend now in 6 months, right? Because then the expectation is no matter what, the revenue that you'll be able to generate in the next 6 months will decrease, or your audience base that you'll be able to bring in the next 6 months will decrease. So I think it's almost as if you're looking at it as, how can I minimize my loss over the next 6 to 12 months during this crisis? So I think part of that is accepting that is a pathway of what's going to happen to your game. So I want to frame it in that sense before you even talk about like the individual strategy.
Right. I thought one of the other kind of interesting things that has happened and what we've seen with coronavirus is that there's like this big differences when we look at the different splits in terms of audience, right? And so whether you do a split by geo, right? Like the way that China reacted versus the US versus other countries has been a little bit different by platform. In other words, mobile certainly benefited, but on the online side, PC console space actually got a lot more benefit than mobile. And then just by game design or gameplay type, for a lot of mobile games, the games where you could absorb the engagement, where you could play a lot, those benefited a lot more than other types of games. And so I do wonder if in the next time you've got this kind of a situation, whether you can kind of create some type of rule set that says by audience in terms of geo platform and by game design type, what are the games that are going to disproportionately improve versus other games? And I think the tricky part as well is that one of the things that I've also been hearing from some of my friends is that for a lot of the games that they're operating, sure, downloads have increased 20 to 30%, but it wasn't like the monetization actually followed a lot later than typical. And so, it's certainly, to your point, Mate, I mean, I think what most UA folks that I'm talking to are just like, well, we don't know what's going on, so let's kind of reduce. But I think the thing that I have an issue with is that there seems to be like a broad sweeping, hey, we're just going to haircut everything. We're just going to reduce the full ARPU curve. And you've got like a 3-year payback window. It's like, are you sure that we should haircut the whole thing? Or like, I mean, I don't know, right? So, and then in terms of like, winners versus losers, do you guys have any thoughts in terms of like whether it's the type of games, or what have you guys been seeing or hearing in terms of winners and losers in this current environment?
Well, definitely winners are the story-based games and everything that all the games that have any narrative inside and that you can play a lot during these days at home. I mean, in the very early Corona stages, I was able to global launch a game, a cooking game, and it's like a combination of the cooking mechanics and some storytelling as well. It's actually performing quite well, and also in the geos that are super affected, like Italy and Spain, and also like in China.
Yeah,
I would say like these type of games should be or are the winners at the current situations.
Right. I agree with that. Like, so the obvious kind of winners are the high engagement games that you talked about. So I think Puzzle Game Match 3, cooking games are definitely some of the big winners.
Social casino as well.
Social
right?
casino. But I question whether, like, what's the definition of that winning? Is it monetization? Is it engagement? I'm sure engagement is through the roof. And, you know, Joe, to your point, but is the monetization rate still roughly the same? And I think Eric Sufer wrote a very, very good article about like a protracted kind of economic downturn and implosion of the app economy. And I think there are some great points about the idea of like, we might see great engagement now, but does that translate to, you know, high revenue later? And to kind of even go a little bit more meta about it is like, maybe some of the bigger winners are the ad monetizing games, right? The games that utilize ad monetization. Even if, let's say, people are pulling back, CPMs are going down, it's a consistent revenue stream that I think a publisher can rely on to generate revenue. Whereas I think as we continue into the new world of like COVID, the rate of monetization will fluctuate depending on how, you know, the 20 million people who are unemployed, will they be able to get back on their feet? Will Congress be able to pass the change? And I'm talking specifically about the US. Worldwide, it might be very, very different. I think if the rest of the world is like New Zealand, great, right? But unfortunately, it's not. So it's very interesting to see. One thing I will kind of point out is you have countries like the UK and Canada where they're actually doing some huge moves in terms of stimulating the economy or even providing livelihood to their citizenry. So I wonder how that impacts the app economy. I don't have that visibility. I would love to know.
Yeah, one of the interesting things from another interview with a couple of social casino guys was that, I don't know if you guys know Lloyd Melnick, but he mentioned that for social casino, as soon as the US sent out those $1,200 stimulus checks, there was like a spike. And so Monte, you're currently buying now. Like, in terms of like, when you hear all this coronavirus news, does that impact your buying strategy? Are you like, oh, wait, there's going to be a stimulus check, another one coming out in 2 months, so let's kind of plan right before that date? Or like, are you thinking, well, coronavirus stuff is looking really bad, so you think there's a recession, are you going to plan for that in terms of your ARPU curves?
No, yeah, definitely like when there's going to be the stimulus check in the next 2 months, I'm like starting to increase the spend on the US, just, you know, to buy those users in advance, to see like how they will perform in the game and trying to retain them. So definitely like looking at these kind of things, because from what I saw and during the global launch, even the Italy and Spain as a country with very bad situations over there, like the people were still playing the game and actually paying quite significant amount of money. So they need some kind of entertainment. So yeah, I know that I was speaking about the lowering the spend and everything, but I think like also like you mentioned the social casino. I mean, the players will stay in the game and eventually they will start paying. It's just, you know, we don't have that data yet. So that's just my only concern at the moment.
As a question to your comment, is the idea that people are stuck at home anyway, they need some form of entertainment. This is still, at least playing social casino or your cooking game is a form of, to the user, a very form of cheap entertainment that they can continue to afford. And therefore it's something that people are continuing to pay for.
I think so, actually. It's, you know, when you are at home, you're just watching Netflix or any other streaming platform for some bucks on a monthly basis. Why shouldn't you just pay that similar amount of money in the gaming? Mm-hmm. So I'm expecting this, but I'm still not sure quite yet.
Mm.
Right. So maybe what we can now talk about is just more of so now we've got this coronavirus situation, but what about a more generalized framework? And so is there kind of like a structured way we can think about doing UA during these kinds of times. And by that, I mean, again, you've got big environmental change. You don't have data. You don't really know. You kind of have an idea of how your ARPU curve could be affected, but how do we build a framework for thinking about big change happens? And then I think, Monte, what you're doing is what everybody else, what I'm hearing a lot of other people are trying to do is like, okay, let's be careful. Let's pull back spend. Let's kind of wait this thing out. Let's get data. And then let's kind of spend after we get the data. But is there any other generalized framework or system that we can think about? I'll let you guys start, and I've got my own thoughts on this as well.
It's all about like making decisions. I'm like making decisions. If I don't have any data, then I'm trying to use my own experiences and knowledge from the previous, at least like similar situation, and trying to do the decisions. So basically, like if I don't have any data, then I'm trying to focus on my gut, and I'm trying to spend wisely, because I don't want to like overspend, and then I'm trying to trying to say like, this was probably not a good idea. I'm sorry, but this is what's gonna happen. High risk, high spend. Well, so that's why I'm more careful about these things. But sometimes it's just high risk, high reward game.
Right.
And when you're saying environmental changes, well, first of all, before we move on, I promised Vishka I would talk a little bit about retargeting. I think specifically for COVID-19, he had a very, very good point. Is like, instead of go and chase after brand new unknown cohort behavior, like go after existing cohorts and trying to get people to come back. You're right in the sense where a lot of the download activity is happening because people are at home looking for new forms of entertainment in different types of games. And I think a great strategy right now is to do a little bit more retargeting. And I know for a fact that a lot of the UA people aren't very focused on this topic. So I think it's something that could be worth considering. To your point about environmental changes, there's different ways, right? So COVID-19 is driving a global recession. And from a UA perspective, this is the first recession that we've experienced on mobile. So it's definitely something to consider. But outside of that are things like legislative changes, right? So earlier we were talking about social casino. Legislative changes like the shifting of the responsibility of real money gambling from the federal level to the state level is now allowing real money operators like DraftKings to now launch in different states. So how will that impact social casino that for a very, very long time have been able to enjoy a broad, I guess, invulnerability from legislation? There's definitely very specific cases like in Washington, but in general, like social casino now has a whole new level of competition that they have to consider. So how would you approach that? How would you consider that? So from my perspective, using that example, there's a couple of things that could happen. One very obvious one is consolidation. Either people just determine that, okay, in order to compete with this, you either have to join with a social casino operator or join multiple social casino operators together in order to combat this, or the consolidation between a real money operator with a social casino operator. And there's different iterations of that, but that's one example I can see potentially happening in the future.
Right. So, and just to kind of give my thoughts in terms of how to think about this situation is like, I would try to create some type of a framework for thinking about when change happens, right? And so the issue that I have is that working with a lot of UA teams before, and certainly not you guys, because and the reason why I like talking with you guys is you guys are more thoughtful, but in a lot of organizations, it's more about, hey guys, tell me what my D3 or D7 ROAS target is, or tell me what my, my target CPI is. And then I'm just want to be a monkey and, just execute, right? Rather than really thinking about, okay, so if a change happens, how do we think this through? And the first thing I think that people need to think about is like the payback window, right? And so like you've got your payback window, And then what is the potential impact on the ARPU? Because in some cases, let's say it's a short-term recession, you might, even when you acquire users, you might just be pushing forward the revenue for a time when people can actually start paying again, when the economic situation changes. And so, but in conversely, if you've got a 3-year payback window and let's say we do go into a depression, you might get fucked too. So like thinking about the payback window and then thinking, okay, well, I've got I'm in hyper casual, CPIs are getting better, so I don't really need to think about it. I'm going to make my money back in 7 to 14 days. But thinking about that payback, thinking about what the ARPU curve looks like, and thinking about, okay, with this curve, instead of just haircutting everything down, let's kind of figure out where and when it's going to be impacted, and is there a potential to actually shift some of that revenue forward or not? I think the second thing I would really think about is thinking about your player segments in terms of all the kind of your payment buckets, right? And so whether you've got like a 1K bucket or a 10K, it depends on the game. But one of the points I think that was a good point from that Eric Seifert article is thinking about, I wouldn't classify all IAP as a luxury good, but certainly in terms of the well behavior, I would say that that's a luxury goods, right? And so maybe like half of your 10K spenders shift to become 1K spenders, and then it kind of trickles down. But I would really try and think about, okay, if there is a certain situation, then how are your payment buckets going to potentially shift? And then this is the part where it's great for UA teams that actually work very closely with product to then think about, okay, do we run a sale? Do we implement like a battle pass system? Because I think what we have been seeing, and something that is proven, is that one of the things that you get from, let's say, a battle pass system is you get higher conversion but lower ARPU. But maybe that actually fits the kind of environment you're going into, where it's like, okay, well, we're not going to have all these high spending whales, but we can shift their spending down and increase conversion to make up for that revenue. And then I think the third thing I would look at is just the segmentation of your audiences, right? And so we noted earlier that you've got regional geo differences, we've got platform differences, you've got differences by game type. And so like figuring out, okay, for our game, where do we fit? And then in terms of the targeting, you're going to have to like treat every region, platform, game differently. The final thing I would think about is, John, you mentioned retargeting. Like for a lot of companies or a lot of games, retargeting, reactivation really hasn't made sense for a long time. But then when you think through the situation, kind of trace route through what the impact on players is and how players may potentially react. And now you've got a lot of people at home and a lot of people trying to play games. So maybe that makes sense now. Then you look at all your other potential types of UA activities that previously may not have made sense, but now maybe they do make sense. And so I guess that the main message I would have is that if you do come up with it, and I'm not saying this is your playbook for anybody. Yeah. I mean, but in terms of like high level, how I would think about it, I would try to create this kind of system, right? So like you've got different rule sets, you've got different things that you're going to like, okay, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to look at this, and be very thoughtful in terms of what you think the impacts are going to be. And then have that inform your UA spending and things like that. But I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
I think you hit on some great points about creating the framework of being able to adapt to big changes. However, that's not something that UA can do as a silo. And I think you and I have had a lot of conversations about the necessity of marketing org really being integrated with the product org. So for example, if let's say, my first question that I would ask is like, is the business able to survive this change, right? So zooming all the way out and not even looking at payback windows, but is this business designed to be able to survive it? So one example is like, if our Airbnb right now, maybe not, right? But if I'm gaming, so as an org to prepare for changes like these is to think about like, am I maximizing all my potential monetization capabilities? Should I now, there's been for years, a lot of companies that we don't put ads in our game. That's just not what we do. It's a philosophical thing. I personally ran into that when I was at Play Studios. Does this change that? When you have a lot of people, to your point, it might, the curve, shape of the curve of LTV might look similar, but now it's just lower or flatter or shifted down. So it's still the same curve, but shifted down. How do you make up for that revenue? And one avenue is to go through ads.
Yeah.
But with that said, it's a process that needs to be designed with product, right? So there are only so many levers a marketer can say, like, oh, I can spend less. I can maybe look at different markets in different ways and spend differently. But fundamentally, your product needs to be able to adapt with how marketing is shifting. And I think that conversation needs to be had. If you haven't had that before, like, teams should be having that conversation right now, because whatever we do on UA serves a broader business goal.
Right.
So unless we're looking at it from a broader business perspective as for the company, then it's not going to make sense if that.
I kind of actually think, as you were talking, it kind of got me thinking that you really need, and this doesn't exist at every gaming studio, but you actually really need two types of integration for the UA team. One, to your point with the product team, the more integrated you are, the better you're able to change and adapt to different situations. But also, Mate, to your point, like, you could literally bankrupt the studio if you're not careful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just start spending and then say, well, sorry, it didn't work out well. And it's like,
you could be like, oops, you guys are going to be out of business. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No pressure.
Yeah.
So, but that speaks to the second integration, right? Which is like, the UA team really needs to be fully integrated and aligned with the management team. The management team needs to be more aware of UA rather than just saying, okay, I'm just going to trust somebody to make a potentially huge call in terms of what could happen with the game and the company.
Yep.
and then to be aligned in terms of what the strategy is going forward. And I think that second integration is also very important in the sense that the other thing that I think about in terms of times of change, you have very little data, things are changing, you kind of have an idea of what may happen or not, but this is a time when I think we're all seeing across the board, UA guys are just saying, okay, let's be careful, let's pull back. But to me, when I think about this, I also, put my game theory hat on and I'm like, well, when everyone's pulling back, wait a minute, maybe now's the time to kind of, go all in, maybe, but then you could bankrupt the company.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, I think about it in football terms, right? And so like, there are some football teams that play to win, and there are some football teams to play to not lose, right? And so if you're up 2 or 3 touchdowns, do you get conservative and just run, pass, or do you just like take it to the other team, just go all in, go aggressive? And certainly there's that risk, right? In terms of if you're too aggressive and you're wrong, you could really bankrupt the company. But at the same time, this could be the opportunity where you take your company to a whole new scale, right? Where you can really like take the company to a whole new level. And these types of opportunities are very rare, where the environment shifts and there will be new winners and losers. So if you have that play to win mentality and you're right, you win. And if you're wrong, it's to Mate, to your point, high stakes, but yeah, I'll let you talk since you're the guy that could be.
The thing is that in these days, very few people want to take the responsibility of making these decisions. And as you said, like, I also think, and my comments are that in these times, you should be, if you're not already, like, very good friends with your product management or the product team, and to be on the very same page, and constantly talking about the situation, what's going to happen, about all the A/B tests of different monetization and how that impacts the UA and how that impacts the development, and also if the UA or the product guys don't want to take the responsibility, there needs to be someone from the management team, as you said. Like, this should be also the conversation on a daily basis, so everybody is on the same page. You just don't blame the UA guys for overspending. That's very careful.
I had a great conversation with our friend Warren from Uptick, and for him, when he talks to a new company and he's going in to essentially act as their growth marketing team, he said that one of his first conversations is with the executive team, and they talk about, like, hey, look, like, you're telling me that you want to grow, but at the same time, you want to pay back within a certain amount of time. Well, realistic. I mean, like, how many times have you and I, have had that conversation?
Yeah, I had this conversation a lot in the previous years.
Like, I've been in situations where I've been told, like, I want you to grow DAO by 20% in the next month, but I want you to maintain the same ROAS. I'm like, no, you can't do that, right?
It's not like that. It doesn't work like that. Come on.
Yeah, and so I think, and I think that's important, right? Because the understanding of profitable growth and impact to margins, and versus aggressive growth, and how far are we willing to eat into that margin, right? How soft are our margin? And I think Warren had a great point there. But fundamentally is having that communication with the executive team. You're right. That's not a decision even as the lead or the head of the marketing org that could make alone. Again, it's not a silo, right? So being able to communicate with the executive team, with the product teams, like, hey, this is the state of the not just the app economy, but the advertising marketplace, right? This is what's going on. CPMs are going down. Our competitors are pulling back. Do we look at this as an opportunity? If I can bring those users into our app, are we confident that we can monetize these users to make up what we're spending out? So, and can we shorten that payback window, given that we know we have a lot of unknowns the longer we push it out? So I think having these conversations will help inform, are you the play to win team, or are you the play to not lose team? I think these are the conversations I would personally want to have.
And also, and how is this going to influence the cash flow of the company as well?
Right.
This is super important.
I think overall, it's like, there's no right answer. I think no one really knows. And of course, I'm sitting here, I'm talking everything from a philosophical level, right? So it's easy for me to say, but a lot of it is, I think if I want to consolidate a few points, is like, make sure those lines of communications are active, right? And when I say active, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to have a meeting with product and talk about what new product features, but really think about, like, okay, in the recession that we're living through now, is thinking about, like, hey, what is our goal in the next 6 to 12 months, assuming that this continues, right? So let's say, to what Eric said in his article, this becomes a protracted recession or protracted economic decline. How are we going to survive as a company? Right. What are the moves we need to make? If you're making that decision now, meaning, let's say, you haven't thought about this until the crisis is here, it is a little late, but you can still make the changes necessary to survive what's to come. But if you're not even having that conversation right now, then you're really, I'm hoping most companies are having this conversation. And once you have that conversation, I think that will allow you to determine what are the logically necessary moves that you need to make, whether it's changing the way that we monetize our users, changing the pricing, doing short-term stuff like live op changes, or even the way we reach out to our existing users, retargeting, revisiting it. So I think these are the things that can come out of this discussion.
No, I just want to last comment from my side as well. I mean, in these tough times, you should be reflecting the actual situation and not get blind by the good numbers. And because I'm hearing from a couple of companies that they're aiming for 1 year payback period, and now since they see really good numbers, they're thinking about aiming for 2 year payback window or 3 year even. You should be very careful about the actual times and changing the strategy, the monetization strategy, right? Because I don't think it's supervised to change the strategy in these dangerous times, and to aim to the 2 year payback period instead of 1. I would do the quite opposite, actually.
Right. Yeah. And then from my perspective, I would say the key takeaways I hope that UA folks would take is that, one is to come up with some type of system or framework, right? And so not just react to stuff, but I do think that from a UA perspective, to have that playbook, have these things that you're able to draw upon. And right now we are living through a time that is very valuable from an experience perspective. And we're seeing data, we're seeing what happens in these different kinds of situations. And what we know is that history and people are very, in some ways, are very predictable. So history always repeats itself. If we have a situation, well, of course, it doesn't have to be coronavirus, but it could be something else that's similar. We know, okay, in these kinds of situations, these kind of things happen. We've seen from a platform perspective, from a geo perspective, from a games perspective, here's all the things that kind of happen. And then it'll help you extrapolate in new situations, what of the previous event were true or not. I think the other point that we made was this real important concept around integration, right? So integrating not only the product team, but also the management team. You can't play to win if the management team isn't on board and understand what you're doing. Because, and to Mate, your point, you're not going to bankrupt the company on a hunch, even though you think 90% we're going to go big, but there's a small chance that we're not going to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then I would also say then the final thing is, you alluded to this, John, but really like going back and thinking through all the different systems, all the different, whether it's reactivation or whatever, kind of trace routing through what the impact on the user is going to be. And then based upon that, not only from a UA perspective, but from a product perspective, right? Should we be running different kinds of sales? What kinds of sales? Should we implement a battle pass? How will payment behavior change? And how do we adapt the product to be able to take advantage of the environmental change? And so, yeah, those would be some of the key things that I hope that more UA folks will take away. I'm glad that you guys are here, and I know you guys are some of the more thoughtful guys, the most thoughtful guys in the audience. So
I don't know, Nebo might
disagree.
We'll have to get him on for the next one.
But yeah, just to one last point is, a lot of times when what we've seen on the last couple of years in UA is that a lot of people have their favorite things to do, and people always end up pulling the same levers, whether you're on product or on UA. I think in times like these is actually a good time for you to stop and actually take inventory of all the available tools you have, whether it's from a monetization perspective, either from a marketing perspective. So if our go-to is I'm going to go buy on Facebook, well, maybe now is a good time for you to evaluate what other potential channels, what other potential levers that you can pull. And I think that is probably the most important thing a marketer can do right now, is taking that inventory.
Great. Yep. All right, guys, with that, I think that's it. By the way, so what kind of coffee are you guys drinking?
Well, I always drink double espresso, multiple times a day.
Okay.
So for me, it's always black coffee, and I actually ended up going to Costco and buying that huge, big 5-pound bag of Starbucks coffee. It's like hands down, I hate Starbucks coffee, but like, it was there. I was just like, okay, let me pour coffee now and get the big bag, and I'm surviving through that. Poor me, right?
Yeah, I'm like the opposite of you, John. I'm like not a coffee connoisseur. I just dump a whole lot of coffee made in my. I like the sugary coffee. So. But anyway, all right. Well, thanks for your time, guys. And until the next UA Coffee Talk, I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Bye.